Welcome back. Today we're going to draw a flayed anatomical figure in the reference position. Flayed means there's no skin on this figure. Reference position is facing us with the palms forward and the arms down. So we're going to not use rulers for this project. We're going to do it freehand, but we want to try to think about average proportions. So start by making a vertical line like this and find the center, and you can check your work like this, measure, make sure you're right in the middle. So that's our midpoint. If we divide the bottom half and the top half in half, now we should have 4 equal quarters. And if you divide everything in half again, you should end up with eighths. Do I do this every time I draw a figure? Absolutely not, but it is good to know how to think about the figure this way. So we're basically drawing 8 head figures today, so we're going to put the head here, and we're going to use the Loomis method to construct these figures. Most of you are going to feel like this head is way too small for this figure because you're used to drawing heads at larger than correct size. We're going to put the pit of the neck less than half a head down from the bottom of the chin. And we're going to space our shoulders about 2 heads apart. So we know what a head is. If you want to make your own little head ruler like this, boy, that placement was off, wasn't it? Okay, so that's about how big a head is. And that's my shoulder spacing. This is my pubic arch, and we're going to triangulate from the shoulders to the pubic arch. We're going to draw the opening at the top of the rib cage above the pit of the neck, and then we're going to sketch an ellipse that fits along the top of this little opening that we just drew and inside the triangle. You'll notice that the bottom of the rib cage lands right about at the 5 heads from the ground, and that's where the navel's going to be. And now we're going to measure about, so on a male, the trochanters are a little closer together than the shoulders, and on a female, they are a little further apart. We're going to make an androgynous figure. I'm just going to, well, this is a guy, so, okay, let's make it a little narrower. Little narrower than the shoulders for the trochanters. And then we're going to draw an ellipse up here. With the top of this ellipse is hitting the navel, and it is a little bit narrower than the trochanters. So notice there's kind of a symmetry here. We have these 2 points on the rib cage, pit of the neck with a little ellipse above it, and the navel with a wider ellipse coming down from it. And this ellipse defines what artists call the bowl of the pelvis. So this is the iliac crest curving around. And I'm basically just copying the diagram that I handed you for the proportion unit that you're working on. So just consider this practice of this construction. Now, there's one really peculiar thing about the Loomis method that we're using, which is that the Loomis imagines a kind of visual continuity between the outline of the neck and the outline of the hips. You see what's happening? We're sort of flowing down through here and coming out, and we're landing above the iliac crest, and then we're flowing down towards the trochanter. So the construction here is sort of like a beer bottle. You see that? It's like, and this is not an anatomical connection of any kind. Like, your neck doesn't connect to your, this muscle is called your external oblique. It doesn't actually connect, but it's a useful construction, and sometimes on the living model, it helps you to relate these things that are kind of far apart. We're relating the form of the hip to the form of the neck. So bear that in mind. It's not anatomy, but it's a useful shortcut, can help you see what you're trying to draw a little better. The line between where the knee joint is about 2 heads up, as you'll probably remember. You'll see that this is curving sharply in. When the legs are posed close together like this. And we're also going to notice that the curve of the musculature on the outside of the leg here is higher, and the curve on the inside musculature is lower. And we're going to talk about those muscles in a minute. So we're doing very simplified block feet for now. And we're going to do very abbreviated arms. I'm going to try to do the arms a little more. Well, let's start with the musculature that goes behind the neck. And then the forearm is hanging almost straight down. And the elbow joint is occurring just slightly above the level of the navel. You see that? Just like about here and here. And this is not a straight line. When your palms are forward, you'll notice on the reference that this angles out slightly, and anatomists call that the carrying angle. You can imagine if you are carrying a couple buckets of water in your hands, you'd keep your palms forward, and that would keep the bones in your forearms arranged to create this angle outward, which keeps the buckets away from your body. You'll notice the wrist is landing really close to the trochanters. You can test that on yourself. If you allow your arms to relax, you're going to find that your wrists land pretty close to the trochanters. And I'm just going to block in the hands. Remember, your hand is about 3/4 of a head. So the hands, as you measure it, are about 3/4 of a head. And about half of the hand is the body of the hand, and half is the fingers. So, and they're going to come down. The fingertips are going to come down just about to this, which is the 3rd head up from the ground. And then we're going to take a quick break so everyone can get caught up. But that's the basic construction right there. Okay, so we are going to block in some features, but no detail. I always like to have features on my heads before I try to do the rest of the body because, as I've explained, we're a lot better at seeing proportion if we can see a face. So we're going to put a line across the middle, and I'm going to do this very simply. I'm just going to put a little shadow where the eye sockets are, a little shadow under the nose. Remember, the nose is halfway between the eyebrows and the chin, and a little shadow for the upper lip. The line between the lips a third of the way down, a little shadow under the bottom lip, and maybe some ears. It doesn't look like much, but that little indication of a face is going to really help us get the rest of the proportions doing what we want them to do. So we're not drawing a specific individual, and leave it all very general like this. And as I proceed, I'm going to be cleaning up some of these construction lines and talking a little bit about some of the anatomy. I used to know it a lot better than I do now, but this will just be an introduction for some of you. And I'm just going to grade these on completion. The proportions don't have to be perfect. Just try to keep up. Here's this muscle is called the sternocleidomastoidus muscle. And like all muscle names, it refers to the origin and insertion of the muscle. The muscle inserts at the point of the sternum here. That's the main insertion. The cleido part of the name refers to the way this muscle divides at the bottom, and a piece of it attaches here to the clavicle or the collarbone. And the mastoidus refers to that lump behind the ear hole that we've talked about, the mastoid process. So that's a useful muscle to be aware of. The clavicle comes to the surface, and an analogy I've heard for the clavicle is sort of like bicycle handlebars. You see they kind of curve up a little and then down, and they go all the way to the point of the shoulder. So we're going to put a clavicle on both sides. Again, they don't have to be drawn perfectly. We're just sort of taking an inventory today of the main anatomy. And this muscle that we already pretty much drew from the Loomis start comes up behind the neck. It also goes to the point of the shoulder, and that, as you probably know, is called the trapezius muscle. And I don't know any of the names of these other complicated muscles of the throat, but we're not going to worry about them. One thing I forgot to do in my construction was the coastal arch. So the nipples kind of fall on this line towards the outside of the chest, if this is a man. And then the coastal arch is a little bit below the nipple level, right about here. And the reason I wanted to locate that is so we could just sort of outline the sternum, which you can see on the flayed figure here. it's important to realize how intense an interest the artists of the past took in anatomy. And when I went to school in the late 1980s at the New York Academy of Art, that was something that we were trying to revive at that time. Now it's commonly studied, especially at places like Lime Academy. It wasn't studied much when in the 80s, but we actually did do several visits to medical schools to draw from flayed cadavers. In other words, dead people that had all the skin taken off. And that's a bigger job than you might imagine, to get all the skin off and leave the muscles intact. Apparently it takes like several weeks of work to get the cadavers ready for study. The ones we drew were being prepared for physical therapy students. Okay, these are the pecs. Those of you who work out probably know so many more muscle names than I knew when I started graduate school. But the pecs are these boxy forms that connect into the sternum on the inside, and then they wrap around and actually connect to the humerus on the and several other points. So that's pretty easy. We're gonna now, I'm gonna outline the form of the abdominal muscles, which start right under the pecs and extend all the way down to the just above the pubic arch. So let's just sort of outline this region. These are more familiarly known as the abs, and they do have a division that goes down the middle. And they've got these sort of triangular shaped sections at the top. We're going to divide this part in half between the navel and the triangular sections. And then we've got these two longer pieces at the bottom. So we've got really, this is the familiar six-pack, 1, 2, 4, 6, like that. These white areas are areas of fascia, which connects muscles. Okay. So we're not going to get into too much detail. We're going to focus on connecting into the iliac crest or the hip are these muscles, the external obliques. They are also, it's in the region familiarly known as the love handles. And then things get pretty confused above that. These are, a lot of people see these bumps on the living figure here, like, see what I'm doing, and think that they're seeing actual ribs, but these are the serratus muscles. They connect to ribs, and so they follow the form of the ribs, but we're not going to get too hung up on that. We're just going to sort of indicate a few overlapping forms here, and we're going to really focus here. You should know the names of these muscles: external oblique. So you've got external oblique, ab, external oblique, pectoralis, and those are the main muscles of the torso that you should know. We're going to save the arms for later and just explore the forms of the legs for now. So if you go to the front point of the iliac crest right here, you'll see a muscle starting here, and it wraps around. It goes all the way down to the tibia, the large bone of the lower leg. And that muscle is called sartorius. It's the longest muscle in the body. And it's an important muscle. People don't build up their sartorius muscles for the most part to the point where you can actually see it bulging. But what it does is it creates a division between the quadricep muscles of the front of the thigh and the muscles, the gracialis muscles in the back of the thigh here. So here's the back of the thigh muscles. Here's the point of the iliac crest again, and here's the sartorius. And the mistake every beginner makes when you're learning how to draw the figure is you take all these beautiful forms that are flowing at different angles to each other, sort of like a suspension bridge, and you just straighten them all out and turn it into like building a snowman. And that's what we're going to try to avoid. That's why it's good to understand a little bit of the forms that we're trying to draw here. So there's a couple little, this is sort of a little bit of the glutealis, I think it's the glutealis medialis muscle showing on the side under the hip, but then the quads kind of start filling out and covering that. So we end up with something like this. And before we get into any detail, let's go ahead and sketch our kneecaps. Kneecap's going to be overlapping the joint between the knee joint, but a little more of the cap, I think, is above the joint than below. And we can see this fascia coming up from the kneecap and connecting to the main quad, which is rectus femoris. You're not going to need to know all about these various muscles that form the front of the thigh, but you should know that most of the mass of the thigh is out in front, and most of the mass of the lower leg is back behind. And that's just the way we're designed. That's how we stand up from a seated position. If you stand up from a seated position, you're going to feel that these muscles in the front of your thigh tense up. If you want to try to copy some of the other details that you see in the diagram, go ahead, but it's not required. Okay. We're going to finish the legs, then we'll take another break. One principle of figure drawing that's probably the most useful is that on the figure, what most beginners do is they oppose depressions on either side of the limbs. So they draw the leg like this. Whoops, you can't see that. And you see how fake that looks? Some of those cheap, like Halloween muscle suits actually look like this, and it's instantly recognizable as fake. What we're actually looking at is whenever you have a depression on one side, you're going to have usually a little projection on the other side. See that? So this depression is opposite this. This fullness here is opposite this depression. And so you end up with this kind of beautiful back and forth movement on the human body that happens almost everywhere, and you're never going to see this. Because think about it. This is the way the muscles loop around the joints and allow us to move. This would be like a tree that had like a skinny part of the trunk and then it got fatter again. It wouldn't even be able to stand up. Right? So always look for forms like this and avoid forms like this. So on the leg, here we've got our depression right above the knee joint here, and we've got this fullness here that wraps around under the knee joint. Here we've got a depression right under this fullness here, and we've got this fullness opposite on the other side. Everyone see how that works? It's a really important idea. I should probably spend more time teaching it than I do. Once you learn to see it this way, you're never going to make the same mistakes again. So here's that depression, here's that fullness. They're always directly across from each other. And they kind of have to be. And it's also useful to remember that the ankle on the inside is higher and the ankle on towards the outside is a little bit lower. And that's because the top of the foot is kind of doing this. It's not completely flat, right? And you also want to make sure you taper the lower leg enough. You know how people who have like certain medical conditions, their ankles like swell up a lot, and it's not a good look. So when you draw people, you want to make sure to keep this area slender. It's going to make them look fit and healthy. So here, this white part and yellowish part here is actually the front of the tibia, and you can feel it right under your skin. There's the bone. There's no flesh. There's no musculature in the front of the lower leg. It's all behind. And we're not going to go too crazy on the feet today. You should be aware that the toes go from fat to skinny as they move out. So I'm going to indicate that with just a simple wedge shape, fat, skinny, down to there, and I'm just going to point the feet out towards me. Okay, I'm going to take another quick break. Okay, the last step is the arms. So you probably know what this is called. What's that called, Bodie? What's this muscle called? Oh, I thought you worked out.
I used to. Now, I'm a fat fuck.
Okay. I don't think my microphone picked that up, which is good. That's the deltoid, or the delt, right? And that overlaps we see a little bit of the triceps back here, but mostly in this view we're seeing the bicep, right? So that's the main muscle on the front of the upper arm. So we're going to do the same thing. That you can think of the delt as like shoulder pads. I mean, as you probably guessed, I don't work out a lot, and when I started learning about this stuff, I was already in my mid-20s, and it's shocking to me now, like just how little I knew. What blew my mind, I might have told you this once, but what blew my mind is that the only connection between the arm bones and the rest of the skeleton is right here at these 2 points. The collarbone is hinged on either side of the sternum, which you can feel for yourself if you could feel the knobs of your collarbone on either side of the sternum, and if you lower and raise your shoulders, you're going to feel that moving. And the collarbone then connects at the outside to your shoulder blades, and your shoulder blades just float on the back of your rib cage. So this is the only connection, bone to bone, between your arms and the rest of your body is right here, which I just never thought about, and like I said, it kind of blew my mind when I learned that. Okay, so here's our biceps on both sides. The muscles of the bones of the lower arm, as you probably know, the radius and ulna, are in the reference position. They're parallel to each other, but when you turn your wrist the other way, they actually cross. So this is the reference position. So we're in the reference position. They're parallel to each other. They're not crossed. Here, once again, we're looking for where is the depression lower, and here it's lower on the inside, and then the higher depression is on the outside. So this depression here is sort of answered by a slight bulge here, and this depression here is answered by a slight bulge there. Let's try the same thing on the other side. If you ever go to life drawing and you see somebody who's able to draw the figure like 100 times better than you are, don't imagine that they're 100 times more talented. They probably just know 100 times more facts about the structures they're trying to draw. And with that knowledge, anybody can successfully draw. It's like we draw what we know and understand. I had a student many years ago here who he was a good drawer, but he wasn't great at drawing anything. But he did his AP portfolio on boats, and that guy could draw boats like in any position, so beautifully. And it turns out he worked in his dad's boatyard, and he worked on boats all the time, and he fixed them, and so he could draw boats easily because he understood the form. Could he draw people that well? No, because he didn't understand the form of a person as well as he understood the form of a boat. So if you want to be able to draw people, you want to learn the structure. And as I've told you many times, if you want to get good at drawing in general, the quickest way is to learn how to draw people, because if you can draw people, then you're drawing something where your brain is going to tell you every time you make a mistake, which is exactly why people perceive this to be a harder thing to draw. It's no harder to draw, it's just it's easier to see what you did wrong. So the hands, again, about 3/4 of a head. Here we can clearly see there's this weird band of fascia that wraps around the wrist to hold all these tendons in. Another thing that freaked me out when I first learned it in graduate school was the fact that the fingers really don't have muscles. The musculature for the fingers is mostly all in the forearm, and you can feel that if you like make a fist and grab your forearm, you're going to feel these are all like puppet strings, and the muscles up here, and the strings go all the way to the end of your fingers. And one of my creepier memories from grad school was there was a flayed cadaver that we were allowed to touch, and you could pull the individual muscles in the forearm, and it would make the fingers of the dead body move. So I had that experience. And if you go to Lime Academy, you could experience something similar, because they are now.
They have cadavers there?
They don't have cadavers there, but they make field trips to New York City, and they do study cadavers in person.
It's a dead body. It's a dead body.
It
Like, what other, like, when do you get to say, like, yo, I got to touch a dead body?
well, you could work as a
Yeah.
you could work as a mortician or something. That's
Like, living will and
okay. That's being recorded, Max. Okay, so if you if you made this drawing 5 or 10 times, you would be on your way to learning this stuff. Why don't we label the most important muscles we learned today, just as I have a little reference. And this is why artists draw nudes. We artists draw naked people not because it's their fetish. It's because we're trying to learn the anatomy, and you can't see the anatomy on clothed figures. So it's really useful to. I'm going to abbreviate the sternocleidomastoidus as just SCM. And we'll just say pecs. Bicep. External oblique. One great thing about being alive today is there's a lot of apps for physical therapy students where you can use your phone to help you memorize all this stuff if you want to learn it. We're just going to say quads. And the only muscle I'm going to call your attention to on the lower leg is here. It's the gastrocnemius, which we're just going to call the gastroc. That's the main muscle in the back of the leg. And sartorius is a really good one to know. sartorius was, it's Latin for tailor, I think, and it had something to do with sewing clothes, but I'm not, I don't remember the story, but. So just a review of the bony landmarks that we can see on the human body. Patella obviously is always visible. We can often see the trochanters. They're going to appear as little depressions right here and here. You can sometimes make out the pubic arch. You can usually see the iliac crest here and here. You can see the sternum. You can see the collarbone, and of course you can see the skull. The form of the wrist is the sort of the ends of the radius and ulna are visible on either side of the wrist. And then there's a little bit of the humerus is the condyles, they're called, of the humerus are visible around the elbow, but the most important landmarks for proportion are going to be the midpoint, which is the trochanter pubic arch, and the pit of the neck, and the knees. Okay, I'm going to end my video now. Thanks everyone at home for watching. Very, very basic anatomy lesson, but good to know if you want to start figure drawing, and good to be able to relate these to some of the things we've learned about proportion. Thank you.